Today on Inside Utah Politics, the Utah Democratic Party organizing convention. Current party chair Daisy Thomas wants another term, but three challenges are lining up to take the job from her. Those candidates are here to discuss why they want the position.
Time now for Inside Utah Politics.
Good Sunday morning, and thanks so much for joining us for Inside Utah Politics. I'm Glenn Mills. This morning we are hearing from the candidates for chair for the Utah Democratic Party, the convention coming up this Saturday. We begin with Becky Moss. Becky, great to have you on the show. Thanks so much for being here.
Thank you for inviting me.
You bet. Important issue, leading the second largest party here in the state of Utah. Talk about your background and what you feel like you've done that qualifies you for this position.
First of all, I'm from the state of Utah, all over the state of Utah. I've been actively involved in the Democrat Party since the early 80s. And I am presently serving my third term as chair of the Utah Stonewall Democrats, which is one of the largest caucuses in the state of Utah.
Talk to us more about that. What is the goal and vision of the Utah Stonewall Democrats?
The Utah Stonewall Democrats want to promote, find, help, support candidates who help LGBTQ issues.
Talk about your experience. You mentioned that growing up in all parts of the state. How does that help you as far as perspective goes from the state of Utah?
They're very much, it's true, there really is a difference of needs between people who are living in northern rural Utah and southern rural Utah. Suddenly the word rural is hard today.
No, that's always a tough one. I have trouble with it too.
Even Salt Lake City, when I travel to meet family and places I used to live, they treat Salt Lake City as a big metropolitan, where I am used to Salt Lake City being essentially a small town, even though we've got 1.1 million people here.
Let's focus in on the LGBTQ issues, because how do those change, and what are the differences when we're talking metropolitan versus rural?
Boy, in Salt Lake City proper, we are actually ahead of the curve nationwide, but it makes exactly the opposite in the rural. We're way behind the curve. So it is a dangerous place for LGBT, especially transgendered people. So we're working hard at making that safe, but we also, on the look at that. I'm going to say the ABC group.
Gotcha.
We also worry about health issues. We've got the aging population. We have the very first aging gay and lesbian population to be recognized in the United States. This is probably the world. We've not been ignored. We've just not been around before. And suddenly you're finding gray-haired gay people all over the place.
Yeah. Okay. Talk about your vision and goals for the party. Obviously, LGBTQ issues are on that, but the party is diverse, lots of different types of people. What is your vision for the party if you are elected chair?
My first vision has to be that we went through, 2 years ago, the Democrat Party went through a schism and fighting and pain, stuff that I had seen happen with the Republicans a few years before, and I didn't want to see that happen to us. It was detrimental to a lot of human beings. So I watched people get elected. I was feeling very good about it, but we've had a failure in it, and I really want to have both feet in, trying to get people back to remembering that we're a very diverse party, but we have similar goals and we need to be friends with each other.
So what would you do different than the current chair is doing?
Daisy, I'm not sure why, but she's held a lot of secret meetings and not been as open with things that are going on. And I think that's very important, that you should never, as a Democrat, have any secrets. You should be candid, open. If something is a secret, then it probably shouldn't be done.
In the state of Utah, you have a very active progressive arm of the party. You also have very moderate arm of the party. How do you bring the two together? Because that seems to be where a lot of the division comes.
That is where the division is. Same with when the Republicans, they had a moderate and then super conservative. And it does mean sitting down and talking and letting them hear where they agree. Because I am a member of the Progressive Caucus, and I understand the views of the moderates. And I understand that as Democrats, we have got to stop sitting back and saying, well, we'll take the scraps. We just can't. As well as with our candidates who win election, we have to be actively involved in supporting those candidates. I think part of the reason why we haven't had good wins is because we haven't stayed with our candidates. They're elected and then we let them go when that's not right.
Okay, so that's a point I want to dig into a little bit more. In November, the Democratic Party actually did pretty well in Salt Lake County. It was a good night for Democrats there. Statewide, obviously, you've struggled. We haven't had a Democrat elected statewide. How do you make those candidates stronger and more viable on the state level? We have about 30 seconds left.
You have to listen to what each one of the different candidates say, because there is not a single line of how do you help each candidate. A candidate in Price, Utah is very different things than you're going to run into one who's in Cache County.
Okay. Becky Moss, candidate for chair of the Utah Democratic Party. Appreciate your time today and being here with us to explain some of your views this morning. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Stay with us. We will continue our candidate profiles right after the break. Welcome back. Daisy Thomas is the current chair seeking a second term. Daisy, welcome to the show. Great to have you with us. Thanks for being here.
Thank you for having me.
So you have been the chair for the past 2 years. So unlike other candidates, you actually have a track record as chair. What do you believe you've done over the last couple of years that warrants another term?
Well, to be fair, we are the most electorally successful administration since 1990. An entire generation means that I am the most successful chair that we have had. I think that that warrants another term. We have a lot of work that still needs to be done. The party is organizing all across the state, and I have been building relationships all across the state. So to begin all over again, to start a new administration with leadership that then has to start that over again, puts us behind. And you don't change pitchers in the middle of a comeback. We are on the upswing, and this is the time for Utah Democratic Party to focus and build for 2020 now.
Okay, yeah, definitely a very strong showing in Salt Lake County on election night. We'll talk more about that in just a second, but chair can be a thankless job. So as you looked at it and said, yeah, I want to do this again, how did you come to that conclusion?
I had a number of people reach out to me. They asked if I was considering rerunning, and I said, well, would you like me to? This is an elected position, and I had a lot of people say, yes, absolutely, you're the chair to lead us through the 2020 presidential. And I had to weigh that into consideration with a lot of other factors. I had to talk to my family and make sure that they were on board, and after a lot of soul searching, we were like, absolutely, we are still doing this. There's still work to be done, and I felt it was my duty and responsibility to ensure that the work that I had started gets completed so that the next administration to take over can build off of something really strong.
Let's talk about some of the challenges you faced in the 2 years. Obviously, you're going to face challenges along with other things you do. The harassment policy and some of the division within the party. Back in April, you issued a statement saying harassment has no place within the Democratic Party, but you did admit to making some mistakes in implementing policy. What would you do different if you could go back and do it again?
So right before I was elected, we had this big issue within our party dealing with harassment. And so coming into it as the new party chair, I wanted to make sure that we had a strong policy in place. And when you're dealing with a volunteer organization and volunteers who are crafting these policies, it does take more time, and it is challenging in ways that we weren't expecting. But we have had some amazing people really focus on trying to ensure that we have the best policies in place, that we are creating a culture that is not only encouraging for candidates, but for our volunteers to feel that they're welcome and that they feel safe when they're with all of our people. And so while we're working on all of these policies and structures that have to go through the process of going through the Central Committee and all of the different approval processes that way, I have worked on having monthly harassment trainings on all different forms of harassment, not just sexual, but also disability and racial and what else have we focused on? We've just done a variety of different harassments because we're all dealing with them in different ways. And until we change the culture, the laws are still the laws, and we have to work within what we can work with.
Are you satisfied that you're on a right track moving forward?
Absolutely. I think that we are finally at a good point. The Central Committee is really close to being complete with where they had wanted to see a policy get to. And hopefully by the end of this year, we'll have something that is workable and implementable.
In that same statement back in April, you also apologized for lack of transparency. That's something that your challengers have locked onto in this race. What's your response to that?
It is really difficult, again, to navigate this space because of privacy concerns and because the situations do cross into these legal gray boundaries that as a volunteer organization, we weren't sure what we could publicly state, what we could publicly do. So we are working on making sure that this process going forward is much more transparent and that these meetings are always open. But those are all learning lessons that happen in an organization that is done by the people.
We mentioned a very successful November election in Salt Lake County. Do you believe you can take that momentum and spread that out beyond the capital seat?
Oh, absolutely. We've already seen energy across the state. We know that there are people just in the wings waiting all over. So the purpose of the party is to develop good candidates so that we can elect good Democrats, and we are on that path. We have focused on trainings. We have done trainings across the state, whether they're monthly, quarterly. We've done seminars. We have focused on not only doing candidate recruitment and development, but also staff and volunteers, because it is not about just one person leading this. It's an entire movement that has to happen from the grassroots up.
Okay, big event coming up on Saturday, the organizing convention. We'll watch how the race plays out, but some other big things you wanted to touch base on real quick leading up to convention. Yeah,
so we actually have a couple things. Tuesday we have the Juab County Convention. Wednesday we have the Duchesne County Convention. Friday is the Taylor Main Dinner. It's our grassroots and labor focused awards where we honor two people. We will be honoring Brandy Farmer and Russ Lamoureux. So tickets are still available. It'll be at the Hogle Zoo.
All right. We will be watching to see how things play out on Saturday. Appreciate your time. Thanks so much for being here.
Thank you.
Stay with us. We'll be right back with more from the candidates.
You're watching Inside Utah Politics.
Welcome back. We turn now to Jeff Merchant, candidate for chair for the Utah Democratic Party. Jeff, great to have you on the show. Thanks so much for being here.
Yeah, thanks, Glenn.
Let's get into your background. What is it that you've done throughout your life that you feel qualifies you for this position?
So I think there are a number of things. First and foremost, I am a lifelong Utahn. I am a Democrat, and I have been a Democrat since the time I was old enough to vote, and that's something that I think is really important. Having said that, I think that my background and experience as an attorney and as a businessman really are what the party needs right now in order to move forward.
Obviously, this is an important position within the party. It takes a lot of work. As you looked at it and made the decision, what was it that said, yeah, I want to make a push for this?
So as a delegate and someone who's been involved in the Democratic Party for a long time, the biggest concerns that I have and a lot of other people in the Democratic Party in Utah have are the debt situation that we have, the lack of quality staffing, and the lack of support for candidates. I think those are all things that I have experience in, and particularly my background as someone who fixes businesses that have kind of fallen apart financially and in terms of staffing and all of that. Those are all things I think I can bring to the table and help the party with.
So what would you do to do those things?
Okay, well, first and foremost, I think that the problem with the party right now is that we don't have a plan. And any organization that wants to be successful has to have some kind of a plan in moving forward. So the first thing that I would do, and the first thing anyone, whoever wins this position, is going to have to do, is focus on fundraising. We're about $80,000 in debt. We've managed to pay a little bit of that off, but right now we still have $41,000, $42,000 on a credit card, which is not a good thing. But you know, my background has given me the opportunity to be okay with debt and to work through those problems. I'm not intimidated by that. I'm not concerned about going out and raising money, which in my mind is not rocket science, but it is about asking, and it is about asking the right people.
We've seen not only in the Utah Democratic Party, but other parties as well, this division between, you know, a progressive arm of the party and a more moderate one. If you were to be elected chair, how would you come in and try to bring those two sides together?
Yeah, so
And it could even be more than that.
yeah. Well, look, I think that like any organization, there are people with different perspectives and different views. That is not an exception for the Democratic Party here in Utah. But if you look at the type of people that have supported me in this candidacy, they come from both sides of that division. And what my hope is that we can bring those people together by having conversation and communication, which is something that hasn't been happening over the last several years.
Do you see that as part of the fundraising problem, is that maybe some from either of those different sides have become disenfranchised and stopped wanting to give money to the party?
Oh yeah, I think that there is a tremendous lack of trust right now with how the party is a steward of money. And I think that a lot of people are very concerned about donating both on the progressive side and the more moderate side. But let's be honest, I mean, I think that if people see the party succeeding and people see the party doing better, then they're going to be more inclined to donate money.
If you are elected, where do you see the party 2 years from now?
I see in 2 years from now, obviously 2020 is a vital election, I think, for the entire country, particularly here in Utah. I see a lot of success. And in fact, I see over the next 5-10 years, substantial success for Democrats. This is a state that's turning blue. If you look at the Republican chair race, there was a lot of talk. They're very concerned about the demographic changes and the efforts that Democrats are making, both here in Utah and nationally. And I think that we're going to see the state turning over the next several years.
Talk about electability and the party's role in getting candidates and helping them take office. Back in November was really a good night for Utah Democrats, specifically in Salt Lake County. But when you shift your focus to statewide, it's been decades since a Democrat has won a statewide election. What is your plan to try to turn that around?
Yeah, so I think that one of the things that we have to be able to do as Democrats is remember that we're a big tent party. We accept people from lots of different perspectives, lots of different viewpoints, and the viewpoints that work in a place like Salt Lake City may not work in a place like Price and may not work in a place like Ogden. You know, if we look at places like Carbon County, we look at places like Weber County, even parts of Utah County, which, you know, everybody always wants to blow off as totally conservative, we have opportunities to grow in those communities. And they grow because we focus on them and we give them some of the resources they need in order to succeed.
Do you feel like the party has gotten away from that big tent mentality?
I think that we have a little bit. I think that we have failed to remember that just because we don't agree on specific policies all the time, that we still agree on values. And as democratic values, I say this all the time, democratic values are Utah values. They're very, very similar. And we have to remember that as we focus on those things, that we can have success, even if we don't agree on how to implement certain policies or even bigger concepts that the legislature might work on.
Okay, Jeff, appreciate your time. It goes by very quick, but glad to have you with us on this Sunday morning. Thanks for being here.
Absolutely, thank you.
Stay with us. We'll be back with the final candidate right after the break. All right, we wrap up our candidate profiles now with Robert Comstock. Robert, welcome to the show. Thanks so much for being here. I appreciate having you.
Thank you.
Let's start off with your background. What is it that you've done throughout your life that you believe qualifies you for this position?
I came here in 1976 with a faith-based community that opened one of the first homeless shelters to ever exist in Utah. And it was totally faith-based. And so my experience with those socioeconomic issues associated with homelessness, and I was on staff and then on the board for about 10 years of those homeless shelters. And that was my avocation. I also worked as a furniture manufacturer, very high-end furniture and cabinets. And during that time, and then in the 1980s, I was a juvenile corrections chaplain. And while I was there, I saw things that I thought needed to be changed, and I started a nonprofit to bring a different type of program to help families whose young people were in youth corrections when they were a organization that the juvenile courts could refer young people to when they came out of youth corrections. And my experiences with that led me to start thinking about politics in early 1990s.
I know I've seen you around as I've been covering stories and stuff, advocating in the community for various causes as well.
Yeah.
Pretty active.
Very active, yes. That's always been what I do outside of my day job.
Yep, and that is?
For the last 13 years, I've been teaching public school in the Jordan School District. I've been teaching woodshop.
All right, so your patience levels, you've had plenty of practice with those. Let's move on to your interest for this position. You ran for this position before.
Yes.
You were unsuccessful back then. What is it that said, you know, now's the time to give this another shot?
Well, I ran in 2011 against Jim Debakis. And I was somewhat successful, even though I didn't win. Some of the reforms I was talking with you about earlier that I proposed, that more Democrats should run for each office, and the delegate should decide which candidates got access to the ballot, as opposed to the executive committee deciding carte blanche who could run for office in the Democratic Party.
So what about this time now? What is it that makes you think, you know what, I need to give this a shot and see if I can get the chairmanship of the party?
Being involved in the Democratic Party for 30 years, I've come up with a lot of strong feelings about what needs to happen in the Democratic Party, a strong vision for what needs to happen. And I have a three parts to my vision for the party. It's basically growth, and our voice as Democrats must become stronger based on our values. And we must defend representative democracy because it's under attack, oftentimes by the Republican Party, who want to suppress voters instead of encourage them.
So you're running up against an incumbent, you and two other challengers. What is not happening now that you think you could do if you were elected as chair?
I'm going to be very honest. For the last 2 years, I've been concentrating on teaching. I haven't been active for the last 2 years that Daisy has been serving as chair. As far as I can tell, she's very sincere about her views, and she is a progressive like I am. And so I'm not familiar with what she's done wrong. I've heard a lot of criticism, but to me, she seems to be very sincere in her efforts to want to lead the party in the right way.
So as a progressive,
Yes,
how
sir.
do you reach out to the more moderate wing of the party and connect with them and make them feel like they are welcome in the party as well?
Our values, progressive values, are not that different than moderate values. My values personally are somewhat conservative. And we can compromise. The problem with the Democratic Party, we've been compromising our principles and our values. We have common values. The progressives might have a little bit different policies on how to address those issues, but what candidate Sanders pointed out in 2016, the candidate that really talks about the issues that are really affecting real people in America, that candidate and Bernie turned out an absolutely unexpected number of voters because someone was talking about the problems that we experience daily, such as health care and here in Utah, air quality environmental issues.
So if you were elected, obviously one of the biggest roles of the party is to help Democrats get elected. Made some gains in November in the State House, but really struggling on the state level. What would your plan be to help candidates perform better on the state level? We have about 30 seconds left.
Let me back up. My vision has three parts. We need to grow in numbers. We need numbers. With new numbers comes new funding. With new funding, we can fund candidates better. But candidates need volunteers, and we struggle every election year to find volunteers. There were 6 Latina candidates about 8 years ago that all lost in the West Valley, the west part of Salt Lake County. They lost by less than 200 votes each. We could have won with volunteers, boots on the ground.
We're going to have to end it on that note. Appreciate your time this morning. Thanks so much for being here.
You're welcome.
And thank you for making us part of your Sunday morning. We hope to see you again next week as we go inside Utah politics.